Hi. So I first wanted to thank you for watching my last video, which you can find right up here. Now, don't be alarmed because I actually filmed this clip on a different day, so I'm about to switch to a different outfit. So don't be too surprised. Let's get started. If you're chronically online like I am, then you may have come across the debate of the terms immigrant versus the term expat, and how these two terms differ and what type of people use them versus use the other term. And it seems both like an interesting debate and also like something that doesn't really carry much weight in reality or really affect anyone's material conditions really at all. So it's an interesting debate to witness, right? And basically, the gist of it is that people who call themselves expats, as in people living in another country other than their own, are usually wealthier, usually white people who are going to a different country because they like living there or because they're like a digital nomad or something and are just trying out the country. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there is another group of people who are generally referred to as immigrants, often really against their will or not necessarily calling themselves that, but labeled that, who are generally from, poorer countries and are coming to whatever country they're living in, not because they necessarily like the culture, but because there's either better work opportunities there than in their home country, or because they're actually like fleeing something really dangerous in their own country. And so these are the types of people who are usually referred to as immigrants, while the wealthier, generally white people who come to a country because they like it are generally referred to as expats. And I think this is an interesting debate because it does sort of show like the difference between, race and class, and like how that affects what you call someone or refer to someone as, right? But I also kind of think it's sort of a stupid debate, and let me tell you why. So, a lot of people, mostly on Japan Twitter, when I used to be on Japan Twitter, don't look for me. It's a completely private account. Um, they were like, I don't like the word expat. It like evokes this idea of, a wealthy white foreigner who doesn't even really care about the culture and is just there to, you know, make money or something. And not just to make money, because they can't get job opportunities, but because maybe the cost of living is cheaper, and kind of ruin the economy for everyone who is from there. I don't know. There's a lot of assumptions. And so a lot of people on, Japan Twitter were like, I don't want to use the word expat at all because it has these connotations. And to be honest, I don't really care if you use that word. Like, expat, the word expat on its own doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation, especially if it's something that you decide to call yourself. And let me clarify, I think anybody who comes to a different country other than their own can call themselves an expat if they want to. It doesn't matter if you're from a richer country or a poorer country or what race you are or anything. You are an expat if you live in another country. And so I really have no problem with people calling themselves an expat, same as I don't have any problem with people calling themselves an immigrant. It doesn't really matter where you're from. It's true. If you go from your home country to another country, and live there, you are an immigrant. So I feel like this debate is kind of dumb because it's just like distracting us from maybe more important issues. And we're all kind of doing this like thing where we're fighting about something that, again, doesn't really matter. Like, I would even say that anyone who lives in another country other than their own can call themselves both an immigrant and an expat. And I would say that I call myself both an immigrant and an expat. Now, again, I am someone who is from a wealthier country, the US, right? And I came to Japan not because I necessarily was fleeing turmoil, though, there's an argument for that. But mostly just because I like the culture. And so in that sense, like when someone thinks of a stereotypical expat, they might even think of me. I don't know. I try not to be too much of too much of an asshole or anything, or like be an annoying like tourist or something. But you might think of me if you think of an expat, you know? And I don't even think that's necessarily 100% true either, because to be honest, like the economic situation in Japan is a lot better than in America. And so when it comes to rent prices, healthcare costs, maybe even job opportunities, I'm not sure. Well, not necessarily. But when it comes to a lot of factors, like living in Japan is honestly a much better choice. And that's part of the reason why I haven't moved back to America yet, or haven't really thought about it, because like rent alone would be just so much more expensive if I lived in the US. So, again, even for people from wealthier countries who are coming to a different country because they like the culture, there might be secondary reasons, such as the economics of it, as to why they're actually going to that country. And so, because these two terms, immigrant and expat, are not necessarily clearly defined, I think I want to give my definition of what I think the two terms mean. And this might be different than the dictionary definition. I'm not even going to look that up. They're probably going to be pretty similar. But so, my personal definition of an expat, again, maybe I said this earlier in the video, but my personal definition is someone who is coming to another country not because they need to, either to escape turmoil or for better work opportunities, but they're coming there just because they like the culture and like living there. And again, that's fine. I don't care. I'm half of the reason why I'm in Japan is because of that. And I would say my definition of an immigrant is someone who is coming to another country primarily for better work opportunities or because they're fleeing turmoil. So those are sort of the connotations of each term that I think of when I think of either immigrant versus expat. But again, I think a lot of people are honestly a combination of those two things. Like they're both looking for better opportunities and they happen to enjoy the culture of wherever they're going. So again, it's not as black and white as a lot of people are saying. And because of this, I'm not necessarily in favor of getting rid of the term expat altogether. Like, I think it still has, like, on its own, it's not an offensive term, really. So, like, I really have no problem with someone calling themselves an expat. I also think, like, you shouldn't automatically refer to, like, white people from wealthy countries as expats and people from poorer countries as immigrants automatically, and just always put them in two different categories, because I think that's really harmful. I more think, like, honestly, you should just let people define what they want to be by themselves. Like, like either term is fine. Like if you call yourself that, it just is when you start to call other people something and like to put them in this category, right, without them um wanting to be in that category necessarily. That's when it gets like, that's when the trouble really comes up. So yeah. And I also just think, like, I feel like this is like a weird way of sowing dissent between foreigners of different groups. Like, it's not that serious, obviously, it's just an online debate. Like, it's not the most serious issue, but it's like almost creating this weird us versus them dynamic of people from richer countries versus poorer countries. When, again, like, I know this sounds corny, but like, we should be working together. We should be supporting each other regardless of where we're from. At the end of the day, we're all in the same boat of like not understanding the language of where we're living and not completely understanding the culture or how to get around at first. And I think it's a lot more productive to like just treat people like human beings and not, get into like the ins and outs of like, well, you're from this country, so you're inherently different than me. Not really, like some people might have more resources to help them in a foreign country than others, but at the end of the day, like, we're all going in blind to some degree. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I might add something on later, but I think the immigrant versus expat debate is kind of stupid. It's a waste of time. It is kind of funny but to watch, but it's generally a waste of time. And Yeah, that's it for now. Bye.